Hey guys, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to start setting up our JSON web tokens. Now, JSON web tokens, I've been throwing that expression around a lot. So let me just give you a snapshot of what they are. They are basically a string that has encoded information about a user. Pretty much. That's it in a nutshell. And really and truly, it's used when sending API calls. It's used to accompany an API call so that the server that is receiving the API call can assess it to see if this token is valid, if the information in this token or this string has information that can validate that this is coming from a legitimate source. So the whole point of JSON web tokens as it relates to user authentication is that when we want to secure an API, based on the user that is calling it, we can use JSON web tokens to say that when you make a call to, authenticate yourself, I'm going to give you a token, and every time you make any other call to somewhere that you need to be authenticated, you can just show me this token and I'll give you passage. We can set expiration dates on these tokens so that if I've been using a token all day and the expiration time is set to maybe 1 day or maybe 3 hours, that means on the 3rd hour or the 4th hour or 1 minute after the 3rd hour since you gave me this token, if I try to use this token again, I am now unauthorized and I need to authenticate again to get a new token. So that's the whole point of JSON web tokens. So once again, a user is going to do some operation that is going to trigger our API, and we're expecting to see that this call to the API has a token. If it doesn't, then we're going to tell this person they need to authenticate themselves. They're not authorized. If they do authenticate, we're going to give them a token with an expiration date, and then as long as they're using this token, they can use our API endpoint. So usually the client will store this token until we tell it it's expired, and then it will try to get a new one. So that's how that whole relationship works. So right now we're building the API. This is the backend, and later on we'll build a client to match what we have put into our API. All right, so that's enough chatter and enough theory. Let's get into some of the practical. So in this same users controller that we just constructed, I'm going to put in another private function. So I'm going to say private, and I'm making this one async, and it's going to be a task that will return a string. And then I'm going to call this one generate JSON web token. And then I'm going to tell it that it must take a parameter of type identity user. All right. And then what I'm going to do is, so it will return a string, but I'm going to put the function call somewhere up here. So I'll just write the function call while I'm at it. So after we've found the user, so we got the user object, what I'm going to do here is say var token string. So this function is generating that JSON web token and returning that string, right? So I'm going to say token string is equal to await and this function call. And we are passing in that user object, right? So that user information will go in. Now let us flesh out this generate JSON web token. So there are a few things that are going to be done here. And some of these things involve configurations that are not here. So I'm just going to say return a blank string for now. All right, just to appease the anxieties for this function. And then what we want to do with our JSON web token is we want to give it a key. So we want to give it some value that is always going to be used, like what we call a salt when you're generating a password. So in the app settings.json, underneath allowed hosts, I'm just going to press comma, and then I'm going to create a new config section. I'm going to call it JWT, all right? And then I say colon, and then open up a new pair of curly braces. And then we have, so you see that this is a JSON file. So if we've been writing JSON or looking at JSON for a while now, so it's the same kind of format. So key colon, and the value. And then we have another one that we're going to call issuer and colon and value, right? So I will include documentation on all of these requirements for JWT, JSON Web Tokens to be set up in .NET Core. Some of these things you have to read and understand, and you may not memorize it all, but at least you have some guidance. All right, so for the key, I'm going to use a static string. So I'm going to also include this static string, and it's just a generated GUID value. So the thing is, you don't want to use a key that is too short. I think when you use a key that is too short, it will give you an error saying that the key is not secure enough, so to speak. So GUID is a perfect kind of value to use because one, it's not something that somebody can just look at your code and memorize the key, and it's not something you can memorize either. But it is, it's unique enough and it is long enough to meet the security requirements. So I would have pasted it or included it with the resources for this video, so you can reuse it or you can just find some GUID. You can even probably go into the database and copy one of those user IDs and use there. That's fine. And then for issuer, I will just write test.com. So for now, like how we're just developing, we can use test.com. When we deploy, we'll probably want to change that to like a more sensible domain, right? So this is who is issuing that JWT, pretty much. So all of that information is used when generating this token string. Now that we're done with the app settings.json, we need to go and get a library. So I'm going to right click, go to manage NuGet packages. And then under browse, we're just going to search for JWT Bearer. So when we do that, we should see Microsoft.ASP.NET Core Authentication JWT Bearer. All right. So we can go ahead with that. And once you have that include, well, I tried it with the include pre-release and it really didn't work for me. It may not work for you based on the version of .NET Core because I think they went up by some increments. So you can untick include pre-release and just get the stable version. All right, so let's just get that stable. So I'm just unticking include pre-release and I'm getting this stable version and I'm including it in my project, agreeing to anything. And then once it is finished downloading, we need to head over to our startup.cs file and start setting up some configurations. All right, so startup.cs, and we go over to our configure services section. And then right above the Swagger Gen configuration file, I'm going to start writing services.add authentication. Oh, sorry, that's a comma. Authentication, and then inside of the parentheses I'm going to say JWT bearer defaults, right, dot authentication scheme. Go to the next line, then I'm going to say dot add JWT bearer. And then we're going to flesh out some options. So I'm just going to say O, and then our little lambda expression looking arrow, and then two curly braces and a semicolon. So I'm just closing that out right now. And then I'm going to break the line here, and then we're going to start writing in some options. So I'm going to say O dot token validation parameters. So right now we're going to be saying defining some parameters by which we, well, obviously validate whatever token is coming in. So token, it's going to be equal to new token validation parameters. And we're initializing a new object. And I think this is saying that I need to include something. So I've included it. And let me just put a semicolon at the end of that brace. All right. So first option is validate issuer, and that one is true. We want to make sure that the issuer is valid. Next is validate audience, and that's also true. Then we validate the lifetime, so we want to make sure that it's valid for the period that we said it should be valid for. We want to validate the issuer signing key. Then we get to the point where we say, okay, who is the valid issuer? So I'm going to say a valid issuer is whoever I said it is according to my configuration in app settings. So I'm saying get the configuration for JWT with the value issuer or value of issuer. And remember that we set issuer to be test.com, right? So, I mean, at this point, it's fairly inconsequential. When you go public, though, it will play a bigger part. And then the next one is valid audience, and that will also be the value of the issuer. Now, the last line is the issuer signing key, all right? And then that now is going to say what was the key, and I want to encode it. So I think I need to include something for encoding here. So it is saying that the signing key will be a symmetric security key of an encoded byte version of whatever value we put as the key. So remember that the longer the key, the better. I'm sure there's a length limit, but I'm recommending that you use a good value right there. All right. So that sums up our configuration for our bearer token, at least right here, right now. If I missed anything, it will definitely come out later on. So let's proceed with this. And you can, take some time, look at it. And once again, the further reading will kind of guide you as to what each of these configurations or options are, which ones you could actually live without, and why they're necessary. Now, moving on, we're going to go back to our users controller, go to our function where we generate these token strings. And then my first line is going to say, well, I think I need to include some config. So I need to inject a dependency for the configuration file. So I'm just going to say private iConfiguration, and of course it should be read only. And then I have to include something here. All right. Hold on, I think I just included the wrong configuration. Let me undo, and then let me try that again. So it's not the automapper configuration that we want, but we want this one, the Microsoft extensions configuration. There we go. And then I'm just going to plug it in as a dependency and initialize it. And so now we have access to the configs. So back to our function to generate the JSON key. So I'm going to start off with a variable called security key. And then this is going to be equal to a new symmetric security key. Let me see if I think I have to type it out. And then I think I have to include something. So Alt and Enter, and then I just include that library accordingly. So new symmetric security key. And then this is actually going to look just like this line in startup. So I'm actually just going to copy this so I don't have to type it all out. And I'm going to just paste it here. So that's our new security key. And then, of course, this would now be, instead of the hard word configuration, I have the dependency for configuration. So this would be underscore config. All right. And then I need to include the missing library for encoding. All right, that's it. So I have the symmetric security key. Next we have var credentials, and that's equal to new signing credentials. All right. And then this is going to have the security key that we just created. And then I'm going to say we are using a security algorithm, or of all the security algorithms, I'm using the HMAC SHA-256. All right. So we're saying that we are generating the security key using that key, and then we want the credentials to have some hash, right? So we're hashing that right there. Next, I'm going to do what we call claims. So you would have seen a table called claims, and a claim is really simple. A claim is saying that what is your information? Who are you claiming to be? I did explain that in the early parts about what the JWT has in its data. So we have the opportunity to actually create the claims that we want to include in this string. So I'm going to create a list. I'm going to say var claims is equal to a new list of type claim, because claim is an actual built-in data type. All right. And I do need to include some system.security.claims library. Let me just put a semicolon there. And then I'm going to say, give me a new claim. All right. And then I'm going to say JWT registered, let me see, registered claim names. So the JWT library gives us all of the potential claims that we can make inside of a token, right? So when we get the registered claim names, I can say dot, and then you'll see them looking kind of obscure, but then some of them make sense. So you can see family name, given name, gender. So these are all of the bits of information that you can include in the token, so that when somebody gets this token after a user has authenticated, that token tells them all of this information. So it's actually a nice, more secure and hashed way of providing information back to the client, right? So the first one I want is sub, and I'm going to say I want sub to have the value of the user. So remember that we passed in identity user.email. So sub is going to house the user's email. All right. Next, and that's just a new claim. So instead of writing it all out again, I'm just going to duplicate that line. And then the next one would be JTI. All right. And then for this one, I'm going to give them a kind of static, but well, a generated GUID value. So new GUID, and then I'm going to put it to string to appease all the data types required. All right. So a new claim must have the type and the value, right? And value must be a string. So we have to get the GUID and then give it the toString. Next, I'm going to have another claim. So this one is going to be new claim. And then the reason I'm typing this one out and not duplicating is that this one is going to be claim types. All right, so that's a list of claim types, and this is going to be name identifier. So I think I need to include something here. So I just do Alt and Enter, and that's not, it's claim types, not claims types, right? Claim types. Spelling is important, guys. All right, and then I'm going to say user.id. All right, so that is the identifier for the user. So after that, I've built up all of my list of claims, and then I'm also going to get the roles. So I want the roles that this user has. So var roles. So the thing is that a user can have multiple roles, even though we have some users and ultimately we'll be assigning every user to only one role. The reality is that every user-based authentication system allows you to, or should be designed to facilitate more than one role. So I'm just going to get all the roles anyway. So I can just say user manager dot get roles async, and then I just get the roles associated with our user. All right. So I have a few claims, and then what I want to do is add the fact that the user is a part of this role and whatever, so that we can help with our authorization, right? Then I'm going to do this line of code where I'm going to say claims dot. So I need to add the roles to the list of claims, but I can't just add it in there. So I have to work a little magic where I'm going to say add range. And then I'm going to say roles dot select. All right. So the cool thing about link is that on the fly I can select from it and then create, and I'm just going to say R lambda, but I'm creating a new generic object of type claim, or well, I guess it's not generic if it's of type claim. And then I'm going to say that I'm creating a new claim for each role that is going to come out of this, and I want claim identity dot default role, right? So default role claim type, that's claim type I want. And then the value, of course, is going to be r dot and, well, actually not r dot, sorry, just r. So we're passing in the value of r, right? So r is actually a string. Right, so it's actually a list of strings. So when we get, sorry, yeah, so I thought we would have been getting objects, but we're actually just getting the role names here. So I'm getting the role names, which is just a list of strings. And then I'm just saying that for each string coming back, we're creating that claim, all right? And then semicolon. Now, after doing all of that, we finally build our token. So I'm going to say var token is equal to new JWT security token, all right? And then I'm getting config, and we're looking for the issuer. So I'm going to say JWT :issuer, all right? And so if you look at the overloads for this function, it will take quite a few parameters. So we're going to be filling it out with this one, the fourth parameter, which is going to take quite a few values. So the first thing is the issuer. Then we need the audience, which we're going to reuse the issuer. Then we need to include the claim. So we'll just fill it out as we go along. So I'm going to have the issuer twice. So issuer, and I'm just going to break line, comma, issuer. And I just noticed I had vat and not var. Sorry. All right, and let me just break line so that everything is clear and not jumbled, right? Semicolon. So I have issuer, and then the list of the claims. All right, and then for every other value, I'm going to have, well, the date not before, I'm going to have null. Then the next parameter will be the, I think it's the expiry time. So I'm going to say expires and colon, and I'm going to set the expiration time for this token to be, let's say, 2 hours. So add minutes. So of course you want to be practical with the expiration, because if it expires every 2 hours, that means this user will need to authenticate every 2 hours. Some people put it to 1 day. I'm sure you notice that some websites will keep you signed in for eternity, and some will sign you out like as soon as you close the browser and you reopen the browser and try to go back, you have to sign back in, right? So I guess maybe they're using JWT and some very short times. So we can say add minutes, add seconds. For testing purposes, I'm just going to say add minutes, and I'm going to say 5. All right, so it will expire 5 minutes after it has been issued. And I'm doing it this way so that we can test it out within the lifetime of one of these lessons, right? So the next thing I have is signing credentials. And remember that we just created credentials. So we're just going to pass the credentials value right there as a sign-in credentials. And then that completes our token generation. And before I continue, I see here that I have some, I think I may have included a library that I didn't have to. So if you see red lines like I have here, then I don't need Microsoft.identity.json web tokens. So that's what I don't need, right? So once again, if you're getting the red lines like I am for the JWT registered claim names, you can just remove that using identity model.json web tokens. All right, and that should fix that error. And then after we've constructed our token, then we can return a more sensible value in the form of new JWT security token handler, and then dot, and then we'll say write token, and then we'll just pass out the token. All right, so that's just going to return the string, the token as a string. So once we've gotten this token string, I'm going to include it with the response. So remember that we're responding with maybe the entire user object, which I'm not going to do that right now. Instead, what I'm going to do is just return the token. So I'm just going to say return, and I want to give it an actual label. So I'm going to create a generic object. So token is equal to token string. All right. So that means once the person authenticates, the response will be okay, and they will get back token : token string in the form of JSON. So then the client should consume that, store it, and then for the lifetime of the token, it will hold the user's information. So let's just test and see what one of those tokens will look like. All right, so I have Postman up with one of my previous requests, and we know that that won't authenticate, but let me try admin and then send, and then voila. So that is what our token string looks like. All right, so this token string once again embodies all of the things that we had put in. We put in some claims for the email, the user ID, generic GUID value. We put in if they're a part of a role or not, or which roles they're all a part of, who is issuing, who is the user, all sorts of stuff, the expiry time. So in 5 minutes, it would expire. So I put it to 5 minutes. We're not going to test that expiration now because you won't see it right now. But what we will do in the next video is we will go back and start setting up some authorizations on some of the existing endpoints, and then we'll see how it works.